Oh, do come on in and welcome to Planet America. I'm John Barron.
Hey, I'm Chad Ciadello.
It is great to be back with you on ABC TV for a brand new series and a whole new election season.
One which might end up looking a lot like the last one.
Yeah, it probably will. Two great guests for you tonight. Trump's former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, will tell us why he thinks his former boss is unfit to be president again.
Knock me with a feather. And Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna on the whole speaker schmozzle and so much more. But first...
And first this week, too. And the search for a Speaker of the US House of Representatives has entered its third chaotic week, with the Trump-driven dysfunction of the grand old party on full display. Earlier today, it looked like sanity may have prevailed.
We are following breaking news. House Majority Whip Tom Emmer has won the GOP nomination for Speaker.
The House of Representatives has all but ceased to function since the start of October, but hopes were high that maybe Tom Emmer would now be elected Speaker and they'd all get back to work and...
Tom Emmer apparently has dropped out after about 3.5 hours. Tom Emmer left the building rather abruptly.
Oh, God. But, John, before we get into this whole crazy Speaker saga, can you please explain what we're talking about here?
Sure can. The job of Speaker of the US House of Representatives is quite different to the Speaker of the Australian House. The Australian Speaker is a Member of Parliament appointed as presiding officer by the government to oversee debates, call on members to ask questions or give answers, and to tell them to sit down if it's not their turn.
I notice who've behaved poorly in the past or are behaving poorly today.
They're basically like a chair umpire in tennis. The Speaker also rules things in or out and can suspend members if they're being too unruly.
The member will resume his seat and leave under 94A.
The Australian Speaker is expected to be fair and impartial, although that's not always seen to be the case by the opposition of the day.
The member for Moreton will leave under 94A.
At risk of adding to the total, I should note that 18 people in one question time is an all-time record since Federation.
OK, bonus points if you can even name Australia's current Speaker of the House.
My name is Milton Dick.
Grow up. The Speaker of America's House of Representatives, though, has a lot of power. They have always been House members, but technically they don't have to be, which is why Trump could end up as Speaker. But they do have the duties of a presiding officer and they get a very big gavel.
Nancy Pelosi, I extend to you this gavel. Thank you.
But the US Speaker is a major political player, not simply an umpire. More like America's equivalent of a Prime Minister, really. They're second in line to the presidency after the VP. And with their majority, they hold the power of the purse strings. Spending bills have to go through the House first. Republicans won a small majority in the House in last November's midterms. And when the new Congress met in January, they elected Kevin McCarthy as their Speaker. Eventually, it took them 4 days and 15 ballots.
That was easy, huh?
To get that gavel, McCarthy had to agree to a measure that allowed just one member to propose a motion to vacate his Speaker's chair, making it very easy for him to be sacked if only a small group of Republicans rebelled and sided with the minority Democrats. Well, at the end of September, McCarthy allowed a spending bill to be passed to prevent a government shutdown, and that continuing budget resolution was only for 45 days, but that was enough for some Republican hardliners to turn on McCarthy, and for the first time in history, their Speaker, one of the most powerful people in America, was dumped.
The office of Speaker of the House of the United States House of Representatives is hereby declared vacant.
Gotcha. So then a temporary Speaker with no actual powers took over. That was Patrick McHenry, who didn't seem exactly thrilled about the job. And the Republican caucus then had their own vote. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise won the caucus vote comfortably, but he quickly worked out that he didn't have the numbers to get 217 Republican votes in the House, which is what he would have needed to be voted Speaker. Unfortunately, this realisation meant that he was numerate and therefore totally unqualified to lead the Republican House contingent. So he dropped out. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan then grabbed for the ring, but Jordan had some problems. Firstly, he had even less caucus support than Steve Scalise did. Secondly, over his 16 years in Congress, he had literally never passed a single bill, and he was known for destroying bridges more than building them, hence the Bronx cheering from the Democrats here.
Jim Jordan, is an effective legislator. It's about reaching compromise and working long hours behind the scenes to get the job done.
The House will come to order.
But Jordan had the support of the Trump base, who rather enthusiastically showed their support by harassing those not willing to vote for Jordan, and in fact, those people's wives.
So what we're going to do is we're going to come follow you all over the place. We're going to be up your ass nonstop. We are now Antifa.
There's so much more of that online if you like that kind of thing. This tactic works so well that after a few days, some of those holding out in Jordan refused to even meet with him or take his calls. Instead of winning 217 votes in the House, Jim Jordan's vote went from 200 to 199 and then to 194 before the Republicans took one more private vote to decide if Jordan should just give up. That time, he only won 86 votes, which is when he finally got the message. And he dropped out. Then they needed to hold another caucus vote, opening up the nominations to anyone who was interested. And then the clown car really pulled up, with all of these guys, and yes, they are all guys, running for Speaker. You won't have heard of most of them. In fact, you'll never hear of most of them. But it became clear quite quickly that the main focus was going to be this guy, Tom Emmer. Tom Emmer is the current majority whip. It's his job to do the numbers and keep the Republicans voting in line. So arguably he's the biggest failure in America right now. But as a member of the current Republican leadership team, he had the inside running. There was just one knock on him. Well, there are actually a lot of knocks on him, but they're all of one theme. Emmer had not forcefully defended Trump against his indictments. Emmer had criticised Trump after January 6th, and he voted to certify Joe Biden's election win over Trump. And finally, Emmer had advised Republican candidates to avoid mentioning Trump when campaigning in the 2022 midterms. Essentially, Emmer had a Trump problem. Now, Emmer's allies had a response to these disturbing allegations that Emmer had supported both of Trump's election campaigns, that he'd never said a negative word about Trump, and that he had an autographed photo of Trump in his office. How sweet. But for his part, Trump said he was remaining neutral with this extremely faint praise of Tom Emmer.
Well, we're looking at a lot of people and, sort of trying to stay out of that as much as possible, but they'll get it straightened out. But no, I've always gotten along with him, and I get along with all of them, really. A lot of good people. We have a lot of great people.
Well, that was good enough for Tom Emmer, who tweeted that clip out with a "Thank you, Mr. President. I look forward to continuing our strong working relationship." Apparently, that did the trick, because Tom Emmer won the final vote, 117 votes to 97 over Mike Johnson, who came second. The question was, would 217 Republicans vote for Tom Emmer on the House floor for the final Speaker vote? It appeared not, with 26 Republicans saying they would never support him. Emmer tried to work on those Republicans, but then Trump dropped the hammer with a truth, saying,
"A rhino, Republican in name only."
Apparently, Trump was going to remain neutral, but then he allegedly changed his mind after someone had shown him that tweet before from Tom Emmer thanking Trump, and Trump was angered by the familiarity of the tweet and the deception that Emmer and Trump had a relationship that they do not. Trump does not like dishonesty. Well, that was the final straw, so Emmer dropped out too. And that is what we're up to, John. At least at the time of our record, there might have been 3 more candidates since then.
Yeah, probably 4 or 5, the way things are going. In fact, the latest speculation is that Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana, who came second, might become the next potential Republican nominee for Speaker. Earlier today, we spoke to Ro Khanna. He's House Representative from the state of California, a leading Democrat progressive. And we began by asking him what it would take for Democrats to vote for a Republican Speaker and break this deadlock.
Well, he'd have to first ask for our votes. We don't have any Republican who's asking for Democratic votes. He would have to come to Hakeem Jeffries and say, I want to work with Democrats and have some reasonable view of keeping the government open and not having shutdowns. Our demands are so modest. Just keep the government open. Just keep it funded. but you need a Republican willing to do that.
So you're really describing kind of a catch-22 here. Nobody can get elected Speaker as a Republican if they're going to pass budget bills and keep government open, and you're not going to support a Speaker if they won't pass budget bills.
Well, I think eventually a Republican will have a conversation with Democrats and say, look, I want Democratic votes. That's what John Boehner did, and sometimes that's what Paul Ryan did. You're going to have someone reasonable emerge who says, whether it's Patrick McHenry or someone on their side who says, I want to govern with some Democratic votes.
Okay, so let's say somehow this all gets together and we get a Speaker and the House moves forward. Does it matter if Trump doesn't approve of the Speaker? What difference does that functionally make?
Well, it makes it hard for that Speaker with his own base. I mean, Trump is likely going to be the Republican nominee. It makes the Speaker weak, but we know whoever is going to be Speaker is going to be weak until 2024, until we have a new mandate in this country. So at this point, it doesn't really matter, in my view, who it is. We just need someone who can keep the lights on, who can keep the government open, who can make sure we're meeting our obligations in the Middle East and in the international community.
Congressman, the president of your party wants over $100 billion in assistance for Israel and Ukraine, and now there's talk of another $50 billion request for domestic assistance programs. So with the House not functioning at all, is the only answer a short-term fix? More powers to the temporary Speaker, Patrick McHenry?
The basic view should be give McHenry the power to bring this up. I mean, we have Putin, who wants to go into Kiev, who's watching closely what we're doing. And if Putin goes into Kiev, that's the biggest signal to Xi Jinping that if he just waits out the West, he could march into Taiwan. We can't allow that. And so we've got to get this funding in there. And I'm open to empowering McHenry for 45 days or whatever to have a vote on this.
Congressman, I entirely understand why you voted against Kevin McCarthy at the time, but in hindsight, would you have voted to dump McCarthy again, knowing what has happened since?
Yes, because McCarthy, again, didn't come to us for votes. I mean, McCarthy never said, okay, I want Democratic votes. I'm going to keep government open. So if we voted for him, hypothetically, and then he says, okay, I'm going to do what Jim Jordan and Matt Gaetz want, then we're complicit in a very extreme vision. We need a Republican who's willing to say, I'm going to abide by the deal I made with President Biden. We're going to keep the government open to 2024. And they're going to then get Democratic votes. I mean, we're not asking for an increase on minimum wage, for childcare, for Medicare for all the Democratic priorities. The deal actually is a 1% cut in the budget, which many of us oppose. We're just saying keep the lights on.
So in reality, of course, you've now found yourself on the same side of the vote to get rid of Kevin McCarthy as Matt Gaetz. I mean, Matt Gaetz.
Well, I mean, that was motivated by Matt Gaetz for his own reasons. But I think it's unfortunate that McCarthy didn't reach out to Democrats earlier on in the way that Boehner had, in the way that Paul Ryan had. He could have avoided the fate he had. He could have neutralized the extreme. But instead, he gave the extreme a veto over him by not reaching out to the Democrats.
Ro Khanna, thanks for your time today.
Your choice, 2024.
Corrupt Biden Department of Justice recently invited an Iranian-backed judge from Iraq to visit our nation's capital. Isn't that nice? He couldn't have been too impressed with our capital. It looks like shit.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was going to
Choose wisely.
To the Middle East now, and the Biden administration has been full-throated in its support for Israel since it came under attack from Hamas militants, who Israel says massacred 1,400 Israelis and others on October 7th in a raid from Gaza.
Hamas committed atrocities that recall the worst ravages of ISIS, unleashing pure, unadulterated evil upon the world.
Vowing to destroy Hamas, which administers Gaza, Israel imposed a blockade and launched round-the-clock airstrikes, which have claimed in excess of 5,000 lives. That, according to de facto authorities there.
Which, to be clear, is Hamas. They run the place there.
Indeed so. Yeah. As Israel prepares for an expected ground invasion in Gaza, a handful of the more than 200 hostages that Hamas took from Israel have been released. There are reports the Biden administration wants Israel to delay the next stage of its operation until more hostages are freed and more humanitarian aid can be sent into Gaza to save civilian lives.
And on that note, the first convoy of humanitarian aid has finally entered Gaza. It's only about time. And weirdly, Israeli ministers are having to explain why it's happening at all. The defence minister was pressed about why they agreed to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza before their hostages had been returned. And he said, the Americans insisted on it, and we're not in a place where we can refuse them. What are we supposed to do? Tell them no? Which is an extraordinary response when you think about it, John.
Meanwhile, US Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin says that removing Hamas, which claims to have built 500 kilometres of tunnels under Gaza, will be very difficult indeed.
I think you'll see a fight that's characterised by a lot of IEDs, a lot of booby traps, and just really grinding activity going forward.
Reports say the US is concerned that Israel is about to launch an invasion that lacks achievable military objectives and that Israel's defence forces are not yet ready to launch a ground invasion with a plan that can work. The US is also concerned that Iran or its regional proxies, including the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, could further escalate this conflict, drawing the United States into a major regional war.
And they've got reason to be concerned, John. Over the last week, Iran proxies have launched over 10 attacks on US forces in Iraq, Syria and the Red Sea. So you can see how this could easily morph into a regional war.
Indeed, a bipartisan group of US senators, including Republican Lindsey Graham, has been in Tel Aviv, Israel this week, and they had a pretty stark warning for Iran.
If this war grows, it's coming to your backyard.
Last week, in a rare Oval Office address, President Biden urged Congress to provide over $100 billion in support for Israel as well as Ukraine in its fight against Russian invaders.
It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations. Help us keep American troops out of harm's way.
There's a problem, though. Some Republicans are against linking aid for Israel to Ukraine, or indeed any further aid to Ukraine. But Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell has signalled his support for Biden's request.
I know there are some Republicans in the Senate, and maybe more in the House, that think Ukraine is somehow different. I view it as all interconnected.
So I think we can take it that there will be the numbers in the Senate and probably the House too if they ever get a speaker and get back into session chairs.
You've got more confidence than I've got, John. A number of Republicans immediately disavowed Biden's proposal, like, for instance, Senator Tom Cotton, who highlighted the $3.5 billion that Biden sought to address the potential needs of Gazans. He characterised it as a resupply line for Hamas terrorists. Tom Cotton also noted the $11 billion allocated for Ukraine's non-war spending, such as retirement pensions for Ukrainian government employees. And he also pointed out the $4.7 billion in the bill for housing, transportation and service for illegal aliens rather than deporting them, which is what he wanted. He was not impressed. Now,
Tom Cotton.
I know. You're obviously right. He's not going to have enough support in the Senate to sabotage the bill. He's Tom Cotton. But there are a lot of Tom Cottons in the House.
Yep.
And I'd prefer to herd cats than to herd Matt Gaetz's. So we'll see what happens there. But back to Biden's concerns about this becoming a larger war. I think he should be concerned, John, not just for the obvious moral reasons, but also for political reasons as well. Right now, Biden's position on Israel is quite popular. 64% of Americans approve of the US sending weapons and military equipment to Israel, including 79% of Republicans and 59% of Democrats. However, there's already a flashing emergency light for Democrats. That is 18 to 34-year-olds who already disapprove of America arming Israel, 51% to 39%. And the really ugly part hasn't even begun yet. Another canary in the coal mine is the congressional staffers. They tend to be young, politically engaged and democratic. 400 staffers have already written a letter to their congressional bosses imploring them to join calls for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. Now, admittedly, they've kept that letter anonymous. That's telling. But Still very early days. And let's look at the broader context here. Back in March this year, before this latest war had begun, Gallup asked Americans whether they were more sympathetic towards Israelis or Palestinians, and they expressed the results as net sympathy towards Israelis. I'll show you what I mean. For example, Gallup here found 67% more Republicans were sympathetic towards Israelis than towards Palestinians. Independents became more sympathetic towards Palestinians over time, that's why the line is going down. But this year, there were still 17% more independents sympathetic towards Israelis. But Democrats, this year, for the first time ever, more Democrats were sympathetic towards Palestinians than towards Israelis. Now, that was back in March. I'm sure the numbers just changed in the last couple of weeks. But let's say in 9 months' time, America is stuck in the middle of a regional Middle Eastern war and tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed, not to mention the Israelis, and there's a humanitarian crisis and there's terrorism and there's no prospect of ending this thing. They started on the side of the Palestinians. Biden and the Democrats might have themselves a big, big problem if they are tied to this war. Now to something a lot less serious. Conservative activist group Judicial Watch thought they were onto a big story recently after filing a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit about the president's dog, Commander, looking to expose secrets about his aggression and biting. They found themselves a source who alleged the president had mistreated his dogs. And that was why Commander apparently kept on biting Secret Service agents. Sadly, this story broke the day before the latest war in the Middle East broke out, so it never got the attention it truly deserved. But it makes me wonder, what kind of story were they hoping to tell here? Maybe something like this.
It's evolved to do one thing.
Commander has now attacked at least 11 times.
What we are dealing with here is a perfect engine, an eating machine.
Its prey, Secret Service agents.
One officer was taken to the hospital for treatment.
The torso has been severed in mid-thorax. There are no major organs remaining. May I have a glass of water, please?
Its territory, the White House.
11 times is a lot.
The dog is going bonkers.
There's no limit to what he's going to do. I mean, we've already had 3 incidents, and it's going to happen again. It happened before.
Can it be stopped?
We are in an incredibly scary time.
Or will the president be next?
They're all gonna die.
Pause. Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the White House.
As the Biden administration continues to hold Israel close, helping to plan, coordinate and possibly limit an expected ground invasion of Gaza, former President Donald Trump has been openly critical of Israel's political and military leaders, settling old scores, it seems, with Benjamin Netanyahu.
I'll never forget that Bibi Netanyahu let us down. That was a very terrible thing, I will say that.
Trump even had this praise for Iranian-backed militant Hezbollah in Lebanon, who could launch a major retaliatory attack on Israel from the north.
You know, Hezbollah is very smart. They're all very smart. The press doesn't like when they say it.
All of which raises questions and, for many, concerns about what Trump would do in a situation like this, were he still president or to be president again. John Bolton was Donald Trump's national security advisor and also served as UN ambassador in the Bush administration. Mr. Ambassador, welcome to Planet America.
Glad to be with you.
What do you make of former President Trump's behaviour throughout this crisis so far? The praise that he gave to Hezbollah, the criticism of the Israeli Prime Minister, talk of refugee and travel bans.
It takes Donald Trump, in the middle of a crisis like this, a grave terrorist attack, to think first of himself and why he didn't like Bibi Netanyahu. Now, he's begun to reprise some of his 2016 campaign lines about barring immigration from Muslim countries. He reveals his inner instincts by saying that Hezbollah was really smart. That's Donald Trump for you. The man is not fit to be president. I'm still hoping we can find, as Republicans, that I and others can find a way to avoid him getting our nomination. It looks pretty tough at this point, but the fight is not yet over, that's for sure.
There is an argument that Trump makes, though, that if he was still in power scaring everybody, then Putin never invades Ukraine and Hamas never attacks Israel. Is there any merit to that argument?
No, this is purely Trump's view of himself, and I think I've sat in meetings with Vladimir Putin. I've listened to the president's conversations with Vladimir Putin on the phone. I think Putin thinks he's a fool and would take advantage of it. Now, does that mean waiting until he withdraws from NATO, which I think is possible in a second term, or does it manifest itself in some other way? But Trump's opinion of himself is a lot higher than the opinion of foreign leaders. I'm very clear about that.
So, John Bolton, how do you feel about the very real prospect that in a little over a year from now, Donald Trump will be back in the White House and handling these national security matters?
I'm very concerned. I mean, I've said that, and I said in 2020 that I felt in Trump's first term he had done damage to the United States, he'd done damage domestically, and he'd done damage internationally. But that I felt the damage was repairable, and I don't think democracy was at stake. I think the damage he did could be corrected. A second Trump term could result in damage that's not repairable, such as withdrawing from NATO. So I think it's a grave risk of Trump being renominated by the Republican Party, and even graver risk that he might actually win the election.
There are legitimate non-Trump options there in the primary field, and at least so far, the Republican Party has not been interested in those options. So is it time for never-Trumpers to just accept that their problem isn't necessarily Trump, but the Republican Party itself?
No, I don't think so. I think Trump is an aberration. And I think the reason you see support is a knee-jerk tribal reaction in a highly partisan environment. People think that Biden is a weak leader. I think a lot of Republicans rally to Trump. I think a lot of the people who say they favor Trump today would consider an alternative if they thought one of the other alternatives was attractive enough. And for a variety of reasons, the current field of candidates has not done that. But it's not too late for one or more of them to catch fire. And there's still discussion of other potential candidates coming in. Plus, Trump's legal troubles may yet begin to sink in on people. I really don't think ultimately Republicans want to elect a convicted felon president. And by November of next year, that's what Trump may be, a convicted felon.
There were reports recently that you yourself were considering entering the primary as a Republican presidential candidate. The filing deadline is fast approaching in New Hampshire to get on the ballot. Are you still leaving that option open?
Well, I have given it thought. I haven't done anything, obviously, but I am contemplating that if nobody can make a dent in Trump, and I don't think any of the current candidates have so far, we just can't let this go by default. And as I say, perhaps the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, might get in, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp. I want to see what happens. I acknowledge it's very, very late, but I think the damage to the country that Trump could cause may require extraordinary measures and unlikely people getting in. We'll see.
John Bolton, thanks for being with us on Planet America.
Glad to be with you.
It's January the 8th, 1992. The 41st President of the United States, 67-year-old George Bush, is attending a lavish state dinner in Tokyo, hosted by Japanese Prime Minister Keiichi Miyazawa. Bush's head slowly bows as he slumps towards Miyazawa and vomits in his lap. First Lady Barbara Bush jumps up and holds a napkin to the president's mouth. The Secret Service come to his aid. Bush collapses unconscious on the floor. White House spokesman Marlon Fitzwater later tells reporters the president is fine, it's simply a case of the flu. The following day, Bush reappears looking tired but cheerful. Of course, that was all before the internet. These days, it's referred to as...
That time President Bush died live on TV to be replaced by a clone. Popcorn emoji, American flag emoji, share.
A claim fact-checkers refer to as...
False.
But what was true, President Bush's health and age were an issue as he ran for re-election in 1992. And the fainting and vomiting in Japan was a reminder.
Don't be alarmed, that's a normal elevation for a healthy heterosexual male of my generation.
Bush had fought against the Japanese in World War II. His presidential rival, 45-year-old baby boomer Bill Clinton, had dodged the draft for Vietnam. Yet voters went for the younger man. And that is it for our first trip back to Planet America. We will return, though, at the same time next week. And do join us on Friday night on ABC News for a fireside chat.
A whole extra show!
Yes.
We're going to have longer interviews there, extra guests, and heaps to talk about. You'll also find us on ABC, iView, YouTube, and Facebook. So much of us. See you later.
Bye-bye.